When the French Revolution began, Americans hoped French democratic reforms would solidify the Franco-American alliance and transform France into a Republican ally against aristocratic Great Britain. In 1789, the Marquis de Lafayette and Abbé Sieyès, with the assistance of Thomas Jefferson, wrote the French Declaration of the Rights of Man and of the Citizens, the central revolutionary document designed to develop popular conceptions of individual liberty and democracy in Europe. Yet, starting in 1790, political instability, violence, and calls for radical social change in France frightened many Americans. This upheaval exacerbated pre-existing political divisions in our own country and aligned political leaders into pro-French or pro-British factions. Jefferson and Madison became the leaders of the pro-French, anti-administration faction, soon the Democratic Republican Party. And they celebrated the Republican ideals of the Revolution. Alexander Hamilton led the pro-administration faction, soon the Federalist Party, which viewed the revolution skeptically and sought to preserve existing commercial ties with Great Britain. President George Washington tried to strike a balance between the two. Hi, I'm Tom Army. As skillfully as Washington tried to maintain civility between the two men and their developing political parties, events beginning in 1793 brought unanticipated challenges that tested the foundation of the young republic. Agitation, discord, and disdain replaced comedy, decorum, and consensus. It began in January 1793, when the new French government, under the leadership of the radical Jacobin Maximilien Robespierre, ordered the execution of Louis XVI and Marie Antoinette. The two went to the guillotine on January 21st. The reign of terror then quickly spread. This rebellion strained but did not break Jefferson's loyalty to France. Then, on February 1st, France declared war on Great Britain. Up to this time, the U.S. traded with both nations, and we made handsome profits. President Washington, unanimously elected to a second term, felt it was essential that the young United States, with a small navy and a very tiny standing army, adopt and pursue a conduct friendly and impartial towards belligerent powers. The President's proclamation of neutrality, April 22nd, 1793, claimed American merchant ships had the right to pass through Britain's naval blockade of French ports. American firms quickly took over the lucrative sugar trade between France and its West Indian islands. Commercial earnings rose, averaging $20 million annually in the 1790s, twice the value of cotton and tobacco exports. The American merchant fleet increased from 355,000 tons in 1790 to 1.1 million tons in 1808. Northern shipbuilders and merchants provided work for thousands of shipwrights, sailmakers, dock workers, and sailors. Yet Washington's proclamation angered those who expected the United States would support our American revolutionary ally, France. Writing under the pseudonym Helvidius, James Madison argued that only Congress, not the President, had the authority to issue such a proclamation. The debate over the proclamation became more visceral with the arrival on April 8, 1793, of French envoy Edmond Genet. Calling himself Citizen Genet to emphasize his pro-revolutionary stance, he began to issue privateering commissions upon his arrival in Charleston, South Carolina, with the consent of South Carolina Governor William Moultrie. Furthermore, Genet indirectly challenged Washington's authority. He set about recruiting volunteer troops to attack Spain's holdings in Louisiana and Florida, and loaded cannons on the ship Little Sarah. Government authorities told him the ship was not to leave Philadelphia. It left anyway. When Washington revoked the French envoy's papers, Genet threatened to go over the president's head and take his case to what he believed was the sovereign state of Massachusetts. Most of Washington's cabinet was outraged, especially Hamilton. The president turned over Genet's threatening correspondence with Washington to the press. And shortly after, the French government recalled Genet. At the height of the Genet affair, Jefferson informed the president that he intended to resign from the cabinet. Washington tried to resolve any ill feelings the Secretary of State had. Still, Jefferson said the breach was too serious for mediation because Hamilton and the Federalists wanted to establish a monarchy in America. Jefferson said he heard Hamilton say the Constitution was a shilly-shally thing of milk and water which could not last. It was only as good as a step to something better. Jefferson continued voicing solid objections to the Bank of the United States. He and Madison believed the bank was unconstitutional. Washington disagreed with the contention that Hamilton was a monarchist and thought the bank was constitutional. For those Americans, such as merchants and shipbuilders and those who supported Hamilton's economic policies, the Genet affair only confirmed their suspicions that the French, under Jacobin leadership, were dangerous to American social stability, natural morality, and the Republican ideals of the young and vulnerable United States. The fear of social revolution at home was well-founded. In 1794, Western Pennsylvania farmers mounted the Whiskey Rebellion to protest Hamilton's excise tax on spirits. Farmers routinely distilled their surplus rye, barley, wheat, and corn to make whiskey. Their whiskey often served as a medium of exchange. Consequently, they refused to pay the excise tax. Many resistors believed they were fighting for the principles of the American Revolution, in particular against taxation without representation. The federal government maintained that the taxers were the legal expression of congressional taxation powers. Protesters built liberty poles, intimidated tax collectors, and even tarred and feathered one tax agent. Posters signed "Tom the Tinker" promised worse violence. In July, more than 500 men attacked the fortified home of tax inspector John Neville. At least one protester died, and the attackers burned Neville's house to the ground. President Washington had enough. To uphold national authority, Washington called on the governors of Virginia, Maryland, New Jersey, and Pennsylvania to raise a militia force of 13,000 men, which the president personally led. The protesters disappeared before the militia arrived. Coinciding with the Whiskey Rebellion was the formation of democratic societies. 1793 to 1795, these political propaganda societies, with strong Republican and Francophile sympathies, created quite a furor. The societies rallied first to combat what they perceived as the monarchical and Anglophile tendencies they discovered in the Washington administration's policies after the proclamation of neutrality and the Whiskey Rebellion. They also took a direct hand in politics, and they played an influential part in the elections of 1794, earning the bitter hatred of the Federalists. The Second Congress, from 1791 to 1793, held 69 seats, 39 pro-administration representatives and 30 anti-administration representatives. The Third Congress, 1793 to 1795, was flipped. With 105 seats, it had 51 pro-administration representatives and 54 anti-administration representatives. With the Whiskey Rebellion crisis over, Hamilton recommended that Washington use the rebellion to censor the anti-administration democratic societies. James Madison argued successfully in the House that such an action would violate the Constitution. There was little evidence to demonstrate that democratic societies specifically recommended uprisings in Western Pennsylvania, but it was clear that Hamilton wanted to destroy the society's public prestige. As political division grew deeper, President Washington faced one last crisis. With Britain and France again at war, American neutrality was challenging to maintain. In late 1793, the British Navy seized 250 American ships carrying French sugar and other goods. Congress debated reprisals. Washington opted for diplomacy. The president dispatched John Jay to Britain. He returned with a controversial treaty that splintered the country into Democratic Republicans and Federalists. The first party system in the United States had begun.